who was growing older. He was getting near the end of his life and close enough to the end that he was starting to wonder what might come next. If there was an afterlife and what that might be like if there was. And one day he was sitting in his room and he was praying about all of this, and God showed up. And God said, "Walk with me and I'll show you what hell and heaven are like." And the man said, "Okie doke." So he got up, and in the twinkling of an eye, he and God were standing in the doorway of this enormous, huge, immense hall, dining hall, festival hall, bigger than Pilgrim Hall. And it had magnificent walls, and down the center of this hall was the hugest table he had ever seen in his life, made of the most beautiful wood and furnished with gold. And the length of the table was a feast, a little like the one that's described in Deuteronomy this morning. Piles of every kind of roasted meat. And enormous vats, china vats, of every kind of fresh vegetable. I mean, you could still smell the freshness of the carrots that had been picked. And they were fixed in the man's favorite ways. And there were huge, teeming platters of bread, the fresh baked kind that you could smell the yeast. And big pots of butter, and honey, and freshly made jelly, and 112 kinds of dessert. Little fancy ones, great big cakes, the really tall kind, and frosting and chocolate everywhere. And the man's going, "This is hell." And he noticed all these people gathered around their table. There were hundreds of them, the length of this table. And he noticed as he looked at them, they were all emaciated and skeletal. Their cheeks were all sunken in, and their skin was all dry and loose, and they were all weeping and wailing and looking miserable. And as he looked a little closer, what he realized is that each of them was holding a dining utensil. It was a little unusual. Each of them had a spoon, but the handle on the spoon was about 4.5 feet long. And every time they tried to dig into one of the dishes, they could lift some of the food out of it, but they couldn't get it to their mouths. And so in the middle of all this abundance, they were starving. And then whoosh, and God and the man were in another dining hall. It looked a lot like the first one. Nice decorations on the walls, gigantic table, the meat, the bread, the veggies, the fruits, all the good stuff and everything. And around this table were about the same number of people. But they were laughing and they were happy and they were well fed and enjoying themselves and telling stories. And he looked closer and he realized they had exactly the same kind of spoons with these really long handles. And he looked at God and he said, "I don't get it. I mean, that was hell, and they all look so miserable. And in this place, everybody's happy, and they look healthy and well-fed, and they all have these ridiculous spoons they're trying to eat with. I don't get the difference." And God looks at him and he said, "In heaven, they've learned to feed each other."